All the
We'll
Saturday
go.
morning viewers that we're gonna have.
Yeah, viewers, enjoy this. We're recording this on a Saturday morning, so if we're just low energy.
Oh, we're live. We've been live. Just kidding. All I do is press the red button, right?
On Audacity.
Yeah.
But we gotta do the countdown first, right?
I know. I'm
Okay.
just
We'll do Jessy and then Michael for the order.
Okay.
Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. And welcome to episode 383 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Jessy.
Michael O'Malley.
In today's episode, we'll be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be celebrating Christmas the only way you can by talking about The Last Temptation of Christ. So
it's the best. You know, I was thinking about it. Like, why did we did an Easter movie? Why didn't we do a nativity movie? That might have been
good nativity. Well, you know what? I don't know how many nativity movies I've seen, but there's actually not that many of them. Like most of them are about the life of Christ rather than just simply the birth.
Well, as Andrew discovered last week, Catherine Hardwicke directed one that Oscar Isaac stars in as Joseph. So
I've heard about that one.
Such a trip.
It's a shot. It's an option. But in the meantime, head over to cinematary.com, get some nice biblical reading in. We got Silence. Cam Watson wrote about Silence, one of the other Martin Scorsese religion movies. And then we're going to keep hyping up the Michael O'Malley Noah magnum opus. So check that out. Read it to your family. Celebrate Christmas. Be like, it's great. Jesus' birthday. Let's all read this.
Noah.
Yeah, a novella about Noah.
Oh my God.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's kick things off. We talked about this one last week, but I think we got more people who saw it, including myself and Michael. But West Side Story, which I saw on Twitter that some people went to the theaters to see the new Spider-Man movie, and then West Side Story started playing. They were videotaping it. It's the entrance with the jets, and I'm like, how great would that be? Instead of having to watch a Marvel movie, you get to watch Spielberg's West Side Story.
I thought you were a Marvel fan.
Like coworkers, and they're all excited about the new Spider-Man movie, which is fine. They can be excited about it, but no one was excited about West Side Story with me, and I was hyped for this movie.
Yeah. So real quickly. Like we talked about last week, you probably know the story of West Side Story. But this reimagined one is by Steven Spielberg. You have, unfortunately, Ansel Elgort in the lead role, as well as Rachel Zegler playing Maria. But yeah, I saw this the other night, and it's pretty wonderful. I think kind of echoing what Andrew said last week. It's kind of crazy that this is the first time that Steven Spielberg's been doing a full-on musical. But man, it's just I was thinking about In the Heights earlier this year, which was fine, but there's just kind of a degree of craft. There's just that difference in craft. This one has so many moments that feel like I saw it just kind of I wanted to go see it on the big giant movie screen, but I saw it on the regular movie screen, and there's just those giant moments where you kind of feel completely enraptured by the whole, he's just able to capture this whole setting all in this one all in one shot.
There's a real confidence to it too. I think thinking specifically about In the Heights, which is an interesting comparison point because it's thematically really similar in some ways. But I think one of the issues with that movie is John Chu is obviously an accomplished director, and so maybe this wasn't him specifically, but there seems to be a lack of almost an insecurity in that movie, because in any one choreographed moment they're constantly cutting to different camera angles as if they couldn't choose which camera angle to use. There's not a lot of confidence in the individual shots that they chose. They're trying to collage them all together, which I thought was really distracting and took away from the movie. In this movie, it's Spielberg and his cinematographer and whoever else was involved, they chose the one shot that they wanted to use, and they just like committed to it. And so like there's a lot less editing because it just feels so much more intentional rather than this whole like, oh, we're gonna have them splash in the water, and you're gonna see 3 different angles of them splashing in the water on the same like leg kick or something. And I just thought like, I don't know, like this is something that bothers me about a lot of modern movies is like how edit happy they are, and it feels really jumbled. But this just felt so assured and like just this supreme confidence in like we have chosen the best possible like technical specs and like technical like camera movements for each scene, and I just thought it was really cool.
Well, and it feels so like painstakingly choreographed. Like there's like it's like In the Heights is still choreographed, but I think that they have to also supplement some of it because with the edits that you're talking about. It's the same with like an action movie. Like they'll choreograph it, but if they don't really have the setup to kind of capture it all in that master shot, it's not going to work. And so then they have to compensate it with edits. And like this movie is constantly able to capture it like in a giant shot. You think about like halfway through the movie, they have that really, really whenever the sharks and the jets are like walking toward each other, and like you love it because there's like the two sides of people, and then there's just these shadows that are like they kind of mesh together almost in like this expressionistic way. It's just like shit, man. Like like that was really my takeaway of the whole movie was just like the entire time just going like shit, like this is so good. Like,
how do you guys
so
think it compares to the original? Like, are you guys big fans of the original one? How do you feel about it?
I kind of like this movie in spite of West Side Story. Like West Side Story is fine. Like I've seen it on like the stage, like a really professionally done like Broadway production.
Oh, cool, yeah.
And I've seen the original like 60s movie, and those were both like fine, like kind of like the best, like they're each going for different things, and like there's things I like about those, but I just have a real issue with emotionally connecting to some of the stuff in West Side Story, particularly the central romance. And
which is not great in this one either.
It's not great, mostly because of Ansel Elgort is just like not up to the task, and neither is the screenwriting. Like it's just so hard to make Tony an interesting character, or Maria for that matter. But Rachel Zegler is really good as Maria, and so
she does a
like
good
really
job.
watchable.
Andrew says the movie is it feels like it really is from a place out of time. Like it really feels like a more vintage movie, except for Ansel Elgort. Like you really feel like you're all part of this world, and then you've got this guy over here.
Yeah, it's like he like slicked back his hair and like put on like a jacket and was like, "Hey guys, what's going on?" There's
it's
like,
me, 50s Ansel Elgort.
a little Back to the Future-ish.
Yeah, so I don't know, like I don't love West Side Story as like a concept. Like it has a lot of cool ideas, and I think that this movie like takes a lot of those ideas and does really interesting things about them without really changing that much about the show. Like Andrew or someone probably talked about this last time, but there's like this whole context of urban renewal where the slum where the Sharks and the Jets live is being cleared out by the city of New York to build Lincoln Center. And so there's this whole like throughout this like anxiety and urgency about like the city is like forcibly evicting us, but the city is also pitting us against each other, like the Puerto Ricans and the
Italian,
Jets.
Italian,
are they
Irish.
Italian? They call them Poles at one point, but I'm not sure.
It seems like an amalgamation of like every
like ethnic European.
Exactly. I think they're like some of them are Italian, some of them are Irish, some of them are Polish.
Which this movie like really plays up like the like kind of political subtext of West Side Story, which is like there in all the versions, but like this movie like really foregrounds it, which I think is really good. I've seen some people kind of like rolling their eyes and being like, we can't have subtle movies anymore. But I think it works really well. And I mean, there's just stuff that's just wildly like in your face. That's like I think awesome. Like the cops like literally use like the Great Replacement like ideology to like get the Jets to attack the Sharks and stuff. And there's just like stuff like that I think is just like great for this movie, because in a story where I really have a hard time caring about the core romance, it builds out the world that the romance takes place in to such a degree where you have all these like bigger systemic forces that are influencing character behavior and decision, and it just like makes it so much more engaging for me, and also kind of elevates the romance a little bit too, because it I think does a better job, or maybe like just a less subtle job of showing how this romance is kind of like taking place in the context of like these bigger like class and racial like conflicts, and so the romance is just kind of like a proxy for these bigger issues rather than something that we're just supposed to care about like innately. I still don't think it 100% works. There's just stuff like it's based on Romeo and Juliet, like as people probably know, and like I think Romeo and Juliet is just a very problematic play in terms of just like dramatic success. Like it is walking this line between like having characters who are just abject idiots, you know, versus us like having to care about like their really outsized emotions. And it's really difficult to thread that needle where you kind of understand that these people are foolish and impulsive, but also care about them. And there's just still things in this story that are just really hard for me to take like sincerely.
Teenagers are so dramatic. They're so dramatic.
But they're not teenagers in this though. They're like, well, I guess they are, but like Maria's 18, Ansel Elgort looks like he's 30, and he like is supposed to be older too. Like he's been in jail and stuff. But there's just stuff like, you know, one character's brother dies, and then the next minute they're like sleeping with the person who killed their brother, and like it doesn't make sense. That's in Romeo and Juliet too, and it's really difficult to like. I don't know. There's things about that are really hard for me to still take, like just on a narrative level. But like, I think thematically, this movie is really great.
She does kind of just like he kills her brother, and then she's like, "You killed my brother," and he's like, "Yeah, but like I'm gonna go now." She's like, "All right, well we can have sex real quick."
Yeah, it's a turn that it's really difficult to sell that turn. In the original Romeo and Juliet play, like Juliet's kind of like alienated from her family, and so there's like the sort of like thing where she doesn't really care about the person who's died. But in this one, she's like really close to and I mean, he's kind of a dick to her. And so maybe that's supposed to be like justifying it. But I don't know. Like, it's just really hard to like make that psychologically coherent that she makes that choice. But all that said, like, I think this is a really good movie and people should go see it. Like, it is disappointing to me that this movie has underperformed at the box office. Where are all the musical theater kids who came out in droves to see like Greatest Showman and all these like hacky?
Oh well, the musical theater kids are they're at home watching that stupid Andrew Garfield, Lin-Manuel Miranda bullshit on Netflix. That's what they're doing. So
what is that?
I don't know
what that is.
It's some bullshit for musical theater TikTok kids. So I'm just gonna get all Ridley Scott and blame them. Well, West Side Story, it's in theaters now, but yeah, you should go see it. It'd be a good like family holiday movie.
Yeah, for real. Like it's like the perfect like award season movie in terms of like it's crowd pleasing, but also like really elegantly made.
Absolutely. Another movie we've talked about previously, but we need to hear Michael's thoughts on. That's going to be the theme today. Is Benedetta. Michael, tell us about your thoughts on The Horny Nuns.
Yeah, so last time I was on this podcast, which I guess was 2 weeks ago, other people had seen Benedetta and talked about it. And like the vibe I kind of got, so this is like Paul Verhoeven's movie, like semi-historical, like a historical thriller about like lesbian nuns, more or less. And I got the impression that this was just like kind of a schlocky, like exploitation-y movie. And I think that that's definitely the case. Like it is a movie that is like trying to be erotic and like play around with like sacrilegious imagery in a way that's supposed to shock and stuff. And I think that that's great. And like, I think that that is there in the movie. So I'm not like disagreeing with what people have said, but I've also found things in the movie that I wasn't expecting based on how I heard people talk about it. And that was like, I feel like this is a pretty interesting exploration of like a theology of bodies and like how, like, what is the connection between like devotion to God and like your own physical material, like body with all of its like fluids and impulses and like all that sort of stuff. And like, I think that that is like coexisting alongside this kind of like, you know, just, you know, lesbian nuns having sex and stuff. And I think that that's really interesting. And like a lot of Paul Verhoeven movies, like he's got this provocative angle to it, but there's also like really thoughtful stuff in it too. Like, so like the nun Benedetta, like at the beginning of the movie, is told that like your body is your enemy, right, by the mother of the abbey, and she spends like the first like third or maybe half of the movie like in opposition to her body, where she's like consciously trying not to have like sexy thoughts, and she's like doing all these things to try to like avoid all this stuff, while at the same time like there's like this inescapability of that you have a body. Like an early scene shows like these two nuns like on the toilet, and they're just like farting and pooping, right? Like you have a body, and
and then wiping their butts with hay, that killed me.
That was unfortunate. Like I can't imagine wiping your butt with hay.
I just kept thinking, I think I thought about that for days. Like there would just definitely be hay pieces in your poopy butt. Sorry.
Honestly, can you think about all the unfortunate things people wipe their butts with before paper was like the standard? But anyway, like the movie is very much about bodies. Sorry, my kids are still at large. You might hear them crying out in the hall.
Speaking of poopy butts.
Hopefully not at the moment. But anyway, like what ends up happening is Benedetta comes to the understanding that like God is speaking to her, and it's kind of left ambiguous whether or not she's truly like having these visions or whether she's just exploiting them to gain power or whatever, which is kind of like an interesting like Paul Verhoeven twisty thing. But like if we're taking her sincerely, God is speaking to her through sexual experiences, and like because like of her connection with the other nun, I'm forgetting her name at the moment.
Bartolomea.
Yeah, she's like, my relationship with her is as close as I can get to God, and like all of her experiences with God are that. And I think that's really interesting, because like throughout so much of history, there have been strains in Christianity about like essentially rejecting the material world, rejecting your body in favor of like purely spiritual aims. And like this movie kind of points out that it's impossible to do that as long as you're actually trapped inside your body. And what do you do with that? And this movie shows someone who is essentially embracing that and making that like part of their liturgical practices is their like embodiment. And like I think that was really cool and beautiful and interesting. So that's my little like what I would add to Benedetta, while agreeing, like my yes and to the last time people talked about it.
Yeah, no, I think it's one. I'll probably try to go back to it and see if I can get more out of it. I don't know. I just like I said last time, like I feel like a lot of it, like Verhoeven is just kind of like getting off on let's try to push the envelope as deeply, as far as we can, which, cool. Like again, that's fine. It's not like anybody else is pushing the envelope, so that's great. But
I will say, I wish, given the subjects that he's pushing the envelope on, I wish this movie had come out maybe 20 years earlier when people would have gotten really pissed at it. Like I feel like right now, like films, like especially like foreign films, that aren't in English, they're just not at the forefront of culture enough to get like those like mass protests. Like I'm sure we'll talk about this with The Last Temptation of Christ, but like that movie pissed people off.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish this movie had come out in a time when it could have truly pissed people off. Like there's been protests from Catholics and stuff like that. And I mean, there are people mad about Benedetta, but like, I want to see like people lose their minds over this movie, because that's obviously what he's hoping that people would do.
Yeah.
I think this whole series has been kind of getting me thinking a lot about
horny nuns.
No, well, about, I guess, the audacity of people to, or I guess the experience of people saying, well, I have heard from God and this is how he speaks to me. And I don't know, it's like you're constantly thinking as a viewer of these movies, like, is this person legitimate or is this person actually just like a nut, And if you kind of come from a Christian perspective, you're trained, or you grow up thinking, no, these people are legit and they're talking about the one true God. But some of these movies I feel like have really shown an interesting psychology to some of these Bible characters, framing them not as these like just sweet, holy, kind people, but kind of like nuts. And then you think about a movie like Benedetta, where she's completely sincere as far as we know. And so, the question that I'm asking as I think about this movie, sorry, my cat is scratching something like crazy. The question that I'm asking myself, like, as I'm watching the movie is she mentally ill and like delusional? Is she just totally misguided? Or is there something of substance there? Is she really truly feeling God through sexual connection? Who are we to say yes or no? Who is anybody to have that authority? I feel like people who get the platform to share their like religious ideologies are usually people who have some kind of power, right? Or they get fucking killed for it.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Definitely.
The interesting thing in Benedetta is that like the movie presents us with a lot of different answers to that question, because there is a way to read Benedetta in which like Benedetta the character is like consciously manipulating the iconography of like sainthood and religious like miracles and stuff in order to gain power. Because like there's this whole like thread in the movie about whether she cut herself to give herself stigmata and things like that. And at one point there's a conversation because one of the nuns is telling the mother superior or whatever, like, hey, I think she's faking this. I saw her with this like pottery shard or piece of glass or something. And the mother superior is like, she's clearly like not cool with that, and there's tension there with like the church politics. But also one of the things that she says in the movie is that like, well, how do we know that it's not God, asking her to do those things? Or how do we know that it's not like God leading her to do those things? So even if like you see a person doing something that is like staging a religious ritual or something, does the fact that that person staged it mean that it's still not from God? Like, it's such a weird, like, thorny question to untangle. Like, if you believe in like God and stuff like that, like, it's really difficult to untangle that.
Who are we to call anybody out on how they supposedly experience God? But then there's the line you tote of like, one person might interpret it completely different than another person, and one person might be causing harm, or maybe many sects.
One person might torture another person to get them to confess that they're not actually speaking from God or something.
Right.
Well, definitely, I think we should probably hold on to that for the second part, because I think that you kind of dive into that in Lost Temptation with that scene late in the movie between Harry Dean Stanton and Willem Dafoe. So we can come back around to it.
What?
But yeah, Benedetta, I believe it's still in theaters now. So if you haven't seen it, it's worth checking out. We got a little bit of time left, Michael, if you want to talk about Power of the Dog.
Yeah, Power of the Dog. This is on Netflix. It is the new Jane Campion movie after however many years. It's been a decade at least since she's done a film. She's done like a couple of miniseries on TV, I think. But so this is like a Western. Takes place in it's like Utah or Montana or something. I think it's filmed in New Zealand though.
It was filmed in New Zealand.
Yeah, but it looks credibly like the Badlands or wherever it's supposed to be. But essentially, like what this movie is a Western in which we have like this ranching community, and you have on the one hand you have Jesse Plemons, who is this dude who's he's like it seems like he's kind of like doing maybe the business end of the cattle business, and then you have his brother who's played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who is like basically like a man of nature. Like he's like completely embraced this like cowboy posturing lifestyle where he has no regard for like politeness or civilized behavior, and he has connected that to like masculinity, and that this is what real men are like. They're rugged, they're rude, and like whatever. And then you have Kirsten Dunst, who is Jesse Plemons' wife in the movie, and for reasons that are like kind of complicated, or maybe not so complicated, Benedict Cumberbatch is kind of the sadistic character specifically to Kirsten Dunst's character.
And her son.
Right? Because he views, once Jesse Plemons gets married to her, he views her as like this kind of feminizing, like demasculating influence on his brother. And their son is like very clearly like not like performing these masculine roles like he would have liked, and so he like torments this son for not being manly enough, and he torments Kirsten Dunst because he views her as like the cause of these things. And so that's like the first half of the movie, and the second half of the movie takes a turn in which you kind of like start to understand like the psychology going on behind Benedict Cumberbatch's character, and it gets really twisted up and interesting about like why he has these ideas of masculinity, like what like the sort of torment that's going on in his mind, and just like how completely not just despicable, but like what has made him such a despicable character. And it doesn't come off very sympathetic toward him, but you understand like what are the things that have happened. And I don't really want to spoil it because it is kind of for a Jane Campion movie, it is a pretty plotty, twisty movie. And I don't want to spoil what happens, but I think it's really good. It's a movie that really rewards close detail. It ends up being a psychological thriller that hits these characters against one another in really interesting ways. That reminds me a little bit of like the like Paul Thomas Anderson movies that he's been making recently, like Phantom Thread or The Master or something, where you have these like totemic psychologies like coming to clash against one another. And how those clashes reveal deeper things about like the identities that these people have. I thought it was really good. We talked about this before we started recording, but I'm not like always in the bag for Benedict Cumberbatch. He's like fine or okay most of the time, but he's like extremely good in this. I think good. Like he completely sells the character that he has, and it's on Netflix, so it's pretty easy for people to watch. I would really highly recommend if people seek it out.
Yeah,
what's it rated?
What?
What's it rated?
I think it's got to be R.
Okay, so it's not like a family movie. Christmas time, sitting with the family.
I mean, this is like it would be interesting to see like an old dad or grandpa person who likes westerns to watch this movie. Like I'd be curious what they would think about it.
Yeah, it's not overly explicit, so I mean you could probably roll with it. They just wouldn't clue into like what Michael's describing, which is like kind of the takeaway of it. This I was really lucky to see this at TIFF on like a big screen. So I'm kind of waiting my time to watch it, on a TV on Netflix. But yeah, I mean, I thought this was great. Like I said, or like you said, Benedict Cumberbatch is really great in it. And it also, I mean, Jesse Plemons just like solid work as well. Like he's very much heavy in like because the first part of the movie is more about his relationship with his brother, the Benedict Cumberbatch character, and then getting married to the Kirsten Dunst character before it shifts to her son and Benedict Cumberbatch in like the second half. But yeah, I would recommend checking this out because I think there's a lot going on there, and it also has a wonderful Johnny Greenwood score.
Johnny Greenwood is having a year. Like he's been in, what was he in? He was in Spencer, right? Didn't he score that? And then I think he's scoring the Licorice Pizza, right?
And he's still, riding the residuals of Phantom Thread. So it's like,
Yeah. Johnny Greenwood, thanks.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back talking about Tempting Christ after this. Good old Temptations.
Okay, so I click mute. I click, what's the beginning button? Is it the beginning skips to start?
You want to skip back to start.
Okay. All right, and then I add tracks, add new, stereo or mono?
I always add a stereo. I don't know if it makes a difference.
Oh, why did it look so giant? Why does it look so big? Andrew, come here. Why does this one look wide? Why is it a double wide track?
It's a double wide. It's a stereo track.
Is that what I'm supposed to do? Whoa.
You hit new stereo track. You need to hit new mono track.
Oh, I thought it didn't matter. Okay. All right, and then that one's muted, so all I gotta do is hit the red button. Laughing at.
You refer to a stereo track as a double wide.
It was like I don't know what else. How else would you describe that? It was extra thick.
Stereo.
It was like the regular track looks like this. The stereo track looked like this. I'm like, why is it a double wide? I don't understand. Let's wait until Andrew's in and out of the basement before we start recording part 2. Sorry.
That's all good.
I like that. Like, it feels like Andrew's just walking around the house, like
He is.
throwing stuff.
I know. He was in there. He was in the living room playing videos, like on his phone. I was like, "Stop it!
Oh,
Like, stop playing videos." He set me up in here. I don't know. Cooper, no. Andrew Cooper's coming down. Sorry, one second.
Jeez.
No.
I was thinking my house was going to be chaotic because
No,
you're up, but it's apparently the Andrew and Jessy house that's chaotic.
Yeah, seriously. I'm glad you got to understand why I made my review of Power of the Dog that it was, because I don't see how anybody didn't like clue in on how funny that scene was in that movie.
I don't actually remember what your
It was
review is.
I like make a whole thing about I make a point about the scene where like Benedict Cumberbatch is a dick to Cody Smith McPhee's character, and Cody Smith McPhee like walks outside, like takes a hula hoop and just starts like violently hula hooping, and I'm like, what the hell?
It's like the only appearance of a hula hoop in the movie too.
Yeah. I'm like, why did he do that? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of like subtly funny things about this. I think I wrote about this in my review, but like how Benedict Cumberbatch refuses to pronounce piano correctly throughout the whole movie is just so funny to me.
God. I also just laugh. I mean, like, there's a deeper meaning behind it, but I just like how anytime Benedict Cumberbatch talking, it's just like, so one time I was with Bronco Henry, which awesome name, by the way.
Bronco Henry.
Bronco Henry.
It's like in
Like
Napoleon Dynamite, the uncle character who's always like, talking about his football days.
Like if you were in that ranch group or whatever, after a while I'd be like, yeah, we get it. Bronco Henry seems like can we just like, do you got any other stories, or are you just gonna talk about this dude the entire time?
Back when men were real men.
Sorry, he's almost.
Me and Bronco Henry were walking down the way, and you're like, oh, yeah, here comes another Bronco Henry's story. That should be like a sidebar Power of the Dog, like the one person who's just annoyed the entire like.
Yeah.
He's just talking about Bronco Henry.
They're free to
pod. Don't play videos out loud again.
Be a good boy.
Come on, brother.
All right.
I gotta make my hair look cooler. Okay, there we go. Now I look cool. Wait, you're gonna play video games out loud? So Mav's gonna be here in like 15 minutes.
Michael's house has been a sterling place. No noises. He has 2 children running around.
Proud of my kids.
Yeah.
I like how he said, my children are still at large.
Yeah. Well, usually when we're recording, they're asleep. So since it's the morning, they're out.
Man, you need to get Posey up in one of these podcasts. See what she has to say. Let the people see her.
I forgot to mention in the West Side Story. Did you recognize who Officer Krumke was?
No.
It was the man, the myth, and legend, Shrek himself from Shrek the Musical.
What?
Wow.
No.
Tell Andrew that. Let Andrew know that was Shrek from Shrek the Musical. Officer
Andrew, Officer Krumke in West Side Story was the guy who played Shrek in Shrek the Musical.
I noticed that.
He said he noticed.
Ah, damn. Always ahead of the curve.
I know.
I just saw
2 steps ahead of you.
literally like he shows up in that first scene, and I was just like, hey, it's Shrek. Anyway, all right. I just wanted to let everybody know that.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. Too bad that wasn't on the podcast. That should have been on the podcast.
No, it's Patreon exclusive.
That would have been some good content.
Gigi, I fucking see you, man. Just sit down. God damn.
Poor Gigi.
All right, here we go.
All right, count us in.
Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. And we're back with part 2 of episode 383 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be talking about The Last Temptation of Christ, the 1988 film directed by Martin Scorsese from a script by Paul Schrader. It's an adaptation of the book of the same name from 1955 by Nikos Kazantzakis. The film stars Willem Dafoe, Harvey Keitel, Barbara Hershey, Harry Dean Stanton, and David Bowie. Jesus, a humble Judean carpenter beginning to see that he is the Son of God, is drawn into revolutionary action against the Roman occupiers by Judas, despite his protestations that love, not violence, is the path to salvation. The burden of being the savior of mankind torments Jesus throughout his life, leading him to doubt. As he is put to death on the cross, Jesus is tempted by visions of an ordinary life married to Mary Magdalene. A 1987 Variety article quoted director Martin Scorsese as saying that quote, he wanted to make the film since Barbara Hershey gave him the novel on the set of Boxcar Bertha in 1972. Scorsese had studied to be a priest, according to another LA Times article. A 1984 LA Times article stated that the film was initially scheduled to shoot in January 1984 in Israel, when Paramount removed its financial backing at the last minute. Having already spent $2 million, Paramount approached Universal and Warner Brothers to take on the production, but both studios passed. The article cited difficulties with casting, the film's budget, and protests from some Christian groups who regarded the film as blasphemous as the basis for Paramount's decision. Both Robert De Niro and Eric Roberts had turned down the role of Jesus, and the studio rejected Christopher Walken, who was willing to play the role. Can you just imagine that?
I hope he was just like calling out people, like, I would love to. Nobody's asked, but yes, I will be Jesus for you. And they're like, oh, no.
I am the Son of Man. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Before Aidan Quinn was officially cast as Jesus initially. At the time Paramount dropped out, the cast also included Barbara Hershey as Mary Magdalene, Harvey Keitel as Judas, and Sting as Pontius Pilate. Sting ended up having to drop out over scheduling conflicts, which is how we got David Bowie, which that was a big win for everybody involved.
He's barely in it, though. He's such a small role.
Yeah, but
I know. That's what makes it even better is that there's like these like ridiculously A-list people who show up for like 2 scenes.
Finally, a 1987 news item reported that Universal agreed to distribute the film in the United States as a negative pickup. Scorsese, along with the cast and crew, agreed to work for scale, which helped lower the cost from $12 million. It also announced that Willem Dafoe had been cast as Christ. According to a 1988 press release, Universal Pictures promised to screen The Last Temptation of Christ for leaders of the Christian community, some of whom had been circulating an early draft of the screenplay amongst their members to elicit a negative reaction to the film. A 1988 LA Times article reported that certain Christian leaders, including Tim Penland, Bill Bright, the Reverend Jack Hayford, and the Reverend Lloyd John Ogilvie, publicly asked Universal to destroy all elements of the film, claiming it was blasphemous. Bright offered to raise the $10 million budget of the film to pay for all existing prints in order to destroy them. Scorsese, along with Paolo Portoghese, the director of Italy's Biennale Film Festival, were acquitted on a charge of contempt of religion made by Italian officials after the film was shown at the Venice Film Festival.
Oh my God.
In 1988, the New York Times...
That's an actual thing you can be charged with?
I guess in Italy,
Dang, this hard times for atheists in Italy.
Yeah, don't fuck around in Italy. In 1988, the New York Times said, despite some maladroit moments, The Last Temptation of Christ finally exerts enormous power. What emerges most memorably in it is its sense of absolute conviction, never more palpable than in the final fantasy sequence that removes Jesus from the cross and creates for him the life of an ordinary man. Though this episode lasts longer than it should and is allowed to wander far afield, it finally has the mightily affirmative, truly visceral impact for which the whole film clearly strives. Anyone who questions the sincerity or seriousness of what Mr. Scorsese has attempted need only see the film to lay those doubts to rest. And in 1988, Roger Ebert said, "Here is a film that engaged me on the subject of Christ's dual nature, that caused me to think about the mystery of a being who could be both God and man. I cannot think of another film on a religious subject that has challenged me more fully. The film has offended those whose ideas about God and man it does not reflect, but then so did Jesus." So on that note, talk a little bit about Last Temptation of Christ. This is one that's been on my list to like watch forever. Not just as, for like what it's kind of stood for, but also just as a Scorsese movie. And I think despite the claim earlier in the series, it doesn't feel like Goodfellas, but Jesus. Other than Harvey Keitel, who like starts the movie by just like punching and beating up people. But yeah, I thought this thing is pretty great. Willem Dafoe is fantastic as Jesus, and I don't know. To me, I think that I really like how Scorsese like grapples with faith. I know, I don't know if that's necessarily shared throughout the podcast, but I really enjoy how he kind of grapples with faith in kind of an interesting way between this or Silence, or even like on smaller levels in stuff like The Irishman or Goodfellas, and because he has like this. I think he kind of has this interesting fight, internal fight with faith that at least makes it for an interesting narrative. But what did you all think of the movie?
I would like to hear Jessy, because this was your first time seeing this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've seen it before, so I want to hear what this felt like on the first viewing.
Yeah, I guess my initial thoughts as you're kind of talking about the huge backlash of it. It's really, I mean, I can kind of see where they're coming from, but I also just don't think I see it as super sacrilegious. I think it's like kind of an interesting psychological case study, to really think about, with this kid, when he's, finally able to kind of understand the world, and his mom looks at him and says, hey, by the way, you're the son of God, and God gave you to me as like a special gift, and you're going to die. Would this kid just like, did the Lord like just download all the information that he needed to have so that he could be like a perfect person his whole life? Or like, was there some real like psychological grappling that he had to encounter? And ultimately that's what he does choose it. But I think this movie kind of gives it the chance to think, wouldn't this be hard? Would this not be something that you would be really having serious doubts and difficulties with? I thought that was neat. I didn't love every second of it, but I guess I just liked kind of the thought experiment there of, I mean, first of all, like if you were told this as a child, you're the chosen one, you're the guy that we've been talking about, how easy would that be for you to swallow? Would you just instantly say, "Oh, yep, here I am. I'm the perfect guy. I'll do that. I'll do all the things you say." Or would that be hard?
I think I've handled it pretty well, in my opinion. I think I've handled it pretty well.
And then at the same coin, imagine you're a Jewish person. Like Jews today still don't think the Messiah has come. So imagine you're a Jewish person, and this guy starts walking, like trying to over everything that you've ever believed and say, "Hey, I know you've been waiting. Here I am. I'm the guy. I'm the one. Yeah, it's me. Hello, what's up? My name is Jesus. Everything you're doing is wrong. Go ahead and just stop. Give up all your worldly possessions. Stop loving your mom. Come follow me, and like maybe be a little bit communist. What do you say?" And everybody's like, "No, it wouldn't be easy to swallow. It'd be really hard."
He struggles to articulate what he thinks.
Oh yeah,
I don't know. He like changes his mind throughout the movie. There's like that early scene where he's like, I guess it's supposed to be like the Sermon on the Mount or something, but like he's giving like a speech about like love, and then he talks about like the rich will be poor in heaven and the last will be first in heaven or whatever, and then people are just like, yeah, the rich, kill the rich, yeah, and they like run off. He's like, wait, no, I meant love. I meant love. And
that's
like
frustrating. Yeah,
it's like funny and also like really like humane and like powerful to see him kind of like struggle to figure out like what is actually the way that I think God is like calling me to,
right.
But then also, how do I communicate that idea to other people?
That's scary. Yeah, it's really scary and overwhelming. How do you roll that good of persuasion just as this guy who looks like Willem Dafoe?
But also, I think
that you're like a person, and like he's like struggling with like guilt and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like really wants to have sex with Mary Magdalene, but whatever.
Can't pull it. No, I think what's so effective about the film is that at least to me this feels like the most true version of like what Jesus would be like as a person, because not just like the more internal stuff that Scorsese and Paul Schrader kind of present, but just like I think that's how people would have reacted, because for the most part, like you're
Right.
describing in that scene, people are not, nobody ever is really reacting to him in a super positive way. I mean,
No.
he has like his disciples, but you think of like when he goes to the temple and starts literally he goes to the temple like 5 times, it just starts tearing everything down,
Yeah.
and nobody likes it.
He shows up to this guy's wedding and he's like, "What's up? Let's have a toast. Also, let me just preach to you. Let me just all of a sudden flip this. I'm gonna be a street like preacher right now." And they're all like, "Dude, get the fuck out of here. No, we're here to party. Like, let's stop being a buzzkill." And they get so pissed at him because he does things in terrible ways.
Well, you think
No
about like
charisma.
you think about like the Jesus in the last movie we talked about, the Gospel of Saint Matt, according to Saint Matthew, where he also is like he's also a super luxury Jesus, but like Pasolini like films it, and this is the case with a lot of like Christ figures in media, where there is this kind of like elevated, like it's this elevated moment, like he's speaking and it just kind of it draws all the attention, it like hushes the crowd and it draws the attention. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's what happened. I think what happened was like in this, where he starts talking and people start yelling at him, because that's what happens when you start talking to people and they don't want to listen.
Talking smack too.
Exactly. And when you're pointing at them saying that they're terrible people who are gonna who aren't following God's plan, like it's not gonna go well.
No.
And
that's what street preachers kind of do now.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of liked with this one. It kind of reminded me of like the character of Noah from Noah, or to a lesser degree like Moses and the Prince of Egypt, where he especially Noah, where it's just like he feels like this street zealot that you don't know. He doesn't seem like a deified, like special figure. He seems like a crazy person,
right?
Who's also Jesus Christ.
I think that's what, like, at least in the movies that you just mentioned, is what makes them like good movies, because so many movies depicting the Bible are they just feel like their characters are encased in amber, not just because of like this like faithfulness to the original text, but also just because of this refusal to engage with these people as people, right? They're always like figures of myth, like figures that have like representing and delivering like these central like faith tenets. And I think when people are able to like actually think about the psychology of it, like the Noah movie is like in some ways like a thought experiment. Like, what if you were Noah and had to deal with the extinction of mankind except for your family? Like, what would that do? Like, how would you react to that? Or like in this one, like Jessy was talking about, like, what if you were you became convinced that you were the Son of God and the Messiah? Like, what would that psychologically do to a person? And I think that one of the reasons why people really, especially for Last Temptation, like, wasn't there like a bombing at a theater or something like that? There was some like wild stuff, like how people reacted. One of the things that gets people really riled up is the idea that even though like people claim to believe that the Bible literally happened, just the idea that these are people like us, in the case of Jesus, like that is kind of like a sacrilegious idea, because he is like supposed to be like the like perfect person, right? And I mean, this movie like has Jesus saying things like "I've sinned" and stuff, which I can get like that. I mean, that is basically blasphemy. But I think also though there is this idea, that Jesus is supposed to be like fully God and fully man, and like people can't conceptualize the fully man part. Like people can really easily conceptualize the God part, because they're just like, well, he's just great. He knows everything. He can do miracles or whatever. Like that's all the God part. But when people talk about Jesus being a man, like it feels really limited, because like, what is being a man? Like, what is being a person without having doubts, without having flaws, without having, these sorts of insecurities that we see like Willem Dafoe go through, and it's like kind of like the paradox of like what's supposed to be about Jesus is that, you know, he experienced what people go through while also being God. And I think that this movie is really interesting in terms of like wrestling with that idea, even if it's not like, I mean, it does flirt with like heretical or blasphemous ideas. So like, it's not doing it through the lens of biblical literalism, but like it is really taking seriously the idea that part of Jesus's nature is human, and he's not like a purely divine figure, which is an idea that's in the Bible.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting when you mentioned that he like talks about how he sinned. It's not like it's trying to be provocative in a way where it's like you see Jesus like just with like a bunch of prostitutes or like killing a man or something. It's like it's more just like he just has like this eternal guilt that he's unable to like express or like quantify. He's just like, all I know is like deep down, like I just have this anxiety. It's very relatable. It's just like I just have this anxiety inside and I don't know what to do with it. And the guy's just kind of like, well, you're supposed to be the Messiah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because he feels the same way about like the world around him, right? He like looks at stuff, and you can see that he's like visibly like upset and anxious about like the world around them. And I can't remember if he talks to Judas or if it's someone else, but he's just like, you know, what are we supposed to do with a world like this? And I can't remember if it's like when he's going to the temple or what, but and throughout, like you see him not just grappling with like his own personal like psychology and his own personal demons, but like, you know, if I'm also like responsible for saying something that is good news to the world at large and not just like atoning for my own personal things. And I have a lot of like real angst about that. Like you have, you know, him going back and forth on like how to deal with you know, the Romans, or how to deal with the corruption of the temple and stuff like that. And you see him at some point say that like, you know, we're gonna fight people. Like this Jesus is like always tempted by violence, and in a lot of cases like goes to violence. But then at other times he feels convicted that that's not the right way, and you see like a genuine like insecurity and unsureness about like what to do with the world, which is like something that I mean, I definitely feel like, you know, if someone was like, well, what do you do about like all these problems in the world? And there's like there's like multiple solutions that I can see as like, or avenues to pursue, but they all, I don't know, there's something insufficient about like some of the things, you know, like with, you know, using violence or using like this like all encompassing view of love, like those feel like very limited. And there's something about like the end of this movie when he crawls back on the cross and he says like it's accomplished, and then you have like those lights play at the end, like that weird little experimental flourish. It's like, I don't know, there's something transcendent about that, because like at least Jesus on the cross finally understands, like I get how I get it, like I understand like what needs to be done to fix the world. And in some ways, we're not really let into understanding that in the movie, nor in like the Bible itself. Like the Bible is not a book of like social reform. It's a book about like, you know, religion, and like oftentimes conflicting ideas about religion. And it's like the job of the believer to figure out what to do with that. And in some ways, like Jesus's trajectory in this movie is the same as the trajectory of any believer, which is that like you are supposed to have some sort of like divine mandate as a believer to like make the world a better place, or to save people, or like whatever. But how do you do that? And like,
and who are you to say like you have heard the word of God? God has spoken to you. Like it almost takes a little bit of a narcissistic person to say, no, I indeed have heard, and I know, and this is the truth.
right.
And then so yeah, I don't know. You can kind of understand both sides of the coin, I think, in this movie, of these people who are like, dude, if you're right, then cool. But if you're wrong, what you're saying is super blasphemous. Like you're gonna die because you're going against everything that we know. And he's like, yeah, okay, I don't know what to tell you. Like this is the truth, according to me, according to what God has told me.
Yeah, and then you also have scenes like him, like he and Judas are like at like a fireside, and he's just telling Judas like, I don't know what to do. Like he's just like openly telling Judas that, and like I think that those, like you have those moments of Jesus speaking with clarity in this movie from conviction, and then you have them like immediately he goes back to his disciples, and it's usually Judas who he's really close to in this movie, being like, I don't know what I'm doing, man. Like I don't know if what I'm doing is the right thing, and like I don't know, like that is like a really powerful portrayal of Jesus to me. Like there's Christians talk a lot about like how we're supposed to be like Christ-like, but that's really hard if you look at just simply the Christ in the Bible, because the Christ in the Bible like knows the future and can read people's minds and perform miracles, like things that we can't really do unless like, you know, something miraculous happens. So like what does it mean to be Christ-like? And I think that this movie maybe gives us insight into that by making Christ like us rather than making us like Christ.
Well, and I also think that the kind of like the lexicon, like the understanding tool for this movie comes in that scene with Harry Dean Stanton's character who plays Saul, who turns into Paul. And it comes late in the movie. Great casting. But it comes late in the movie, like after like Jesus has been living this ordinary life, and they're like walking through kind of a marketplace, and they hear Saul or Paul preaching, and he's like he's telling the tale of Jesus of Nazareth, and he's like telling what you would hear as like the more traditional biblical tale. So then Jesus comes up to him afterwards and is kind of like yelling at like you're lying to them, like this is not that wasn't who I was. I'm Jesus. I didn't die on the cross. I didn't rise after 3 days. Like what the hell are you talking about? And it's I think that it kind of opened that's the part that kind of opened the movie up to me, because then Paul was just like, well, I mean, you could be, I don't know. All I'm saying is that this Jesus really, like, I'm telling this because it's supposed to inspire people. It's supposed to give people direction. It's supposed to give people something to kind of look toward. And so that's why I'm gonna continue telling this story. I don't know who you are. You know, you could be Jesus. You couldn't be Jesus. I don't know. Like I'm not sure. All I know is this story like gives something to people, and I'm gonna continue to tell it. And I'm like, yeah, that's why that's why I kind of am like the Jesus that's being portrayed in this movie seems much more true, but what Paul is telling him is kind of what I interpret from a lot of the Bible is it like any other fairy tale or myth or what, like it's giving you the version that it wants you to take and inspire you with. Which, I mean, that's the mode it's supposed to be working. That's not, whether you interpret that as good or bad. I'm like, yeah, that's just how it is. That's just with any other myth, it didn't work in the same way.
Well, and I think that's just true for the religious experience. You can't, like, everybody has kind of their own personal narrative and their own personal understanding of it. And people can say that they understand it the exact same way as this person told them to understand it, but there's no way. Like everybody has to. I don't know. Like it really, to me, it's just been a question I've been thinking about a lot. Of, are all these people really talking about the exact same thing, or do they think they're talking about is the concept that they think that they're all talking about the same thing?
No, I think, at least for me, it's like what Paul tells Jesus. It's more they're telling the story that gives them the most comfort.
Right.
Like dying is scary, and a lot of people just need, like, everybody needs a way to process it. And most people, look, we got Posey. Posey's joined the podcast.
Posey, please tell us your thoughts.
My daughter who was napping, but now I gotta get it.
Well, Posey, we're getting into some deep theological stuff. So if you could, give us some feedback afterwards.
You're a baby. Can you tell us kind of what you just started existing? Can you tell us, like, if there's a life beyond here? You probably would know.
What do you say, Posey? Okay.
I feel the same way, Posey.
Yeah, I'm always saying that.
But anyway, so what I'm saying is like I think death is scary for people, and so that they interpret the story in the way that makes death seem the less, frightening. And so what is that the correct story? Who knows? Again,
Right.
it's people, right? It's people who wrote a story from 2000 plus years ago. So we like who the hell knows? It's the same as like trying to interpret who Aristotle actually was or who Plato actually was. I mean that was from so long ago. You don't.
And it's so many
don't know.
people's iterations of the story. Like the Matthew, Mark, Luke, John are all the same story, but from somebody else's perspective of it. So everybody has their own version of what this means to them and who God is to them, all sort of agreeing, yeah, it's the same guy that we're all worshiping. But I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm even conveying what I'm trying to say.
No, it's hard too, like, if you're like me and consider yourself like a Christian, like what to do with like those competing versions of like what Jesus is. Like in a certain way you can be kind of like pluralistic and be like, yeah, that's chill, like, people just find whatever meaning that they can get out of it. But like in another way, there are like, real consequences for like the beliefs, like, the ideas that you think are embodied by these stories, and I mean, the movie shows this, it matters, whether or not people believe that Jesus is wanting them to, trying to instigate a riot, or whether or not he's asking people to treat each other with compassion. It matters in the same way if like, modern Christians think that Jesus is calling them to save souls at the expense of the world, which is basically like the evangelical Christian perspective, which is that the afterlife is what's most important. Therefore, like by any means necessary to save souls, we'll let the world burn. We'll let people suffer in this world, whether, because what we think that Jesus represents is hope for the afterlife. And so we got to get as many people into the afterlife as possible. And like, it really means something for a lot of people's lives, and oftentimes very negative things, to allow that idea about Jesus to exist, in the same way that like, the kind of white supremacist like version of Jesus that like, subjugates people under like this like, white God figure. Like, I don't know, it's hard to be like sanguine about those sorts of things, while also getting irritated at like the biblical literalists who are like thinking that there is only one way to believe in Jesus. Like, it's hard to hold both of those things in your hands at the same time. I think actually Ham's essay on silence is like a really interesting engagement with this, because the movie Silence is basically, in the book Silence, is basically about like what you were talking about, Jesse, is like the kind of arrogance to assume that you're like on God's mission. Because in that movie and in that book, the priest like who's played by Andrew Garfield in the movie is going to Japan to like help persecuted Christians there, and he begins to view the suffering that he goes through as like, well, this is the same as the suffering that Jesus went through. This is me being Christ-like, is by suffering. But what he comes to realize in the course of the movie and in the book is that my comparing myself to Jesus in this specific way is causing the Japanese to suffer. As long as I am openly pursuing martyrdom, like, it is causing all these Japanese Christians to be tortured and killed. And so it's more important for me to essentially like audibly reject that I'm in any way associated with Christianity anymore, and allow people to have, peace, than to like pursue these ideas. And like, it is more Christ-like to not affiliate yourself with Christ in this instance. And
well, it's like that idea: preach through your actions, not through your words. At all times, what is it? A Bible quote or somebody else? At all times, preach. If necessary, use words.
That's not the Bible, but I've heard that before.
Yeah,
I think that's just the dad quote of "Do not as I say, do as I do."
Well, I mean, I guess I'm a lot I'm not really interested in Christianity as like a type of life insurance. And I feel like that's how a lot of people view it, is like, this is
like
just
that.
me protecting my soul from hell. And that
Right.
doesn't seem like the right kind of motivation. I feel like if that's your entire motivation, then your heart's not really in it. You're just like trying to cover your ass.
Right.
I
Well,
like
manipulative.
Christianity. I like Christianity as like a tenet of how to treat people and how to treat like the world around you, but then there's so many interpretations of how you're supposed to interact with the world around you that it feels a little exhausting. Like, who has the right answers? I guess I don't know.
Right.
And I think that's something
Well,
you just have to reconcile with yourself.
The idea that which is like the evangelical idea, the idea that you should follow Christ because it gives you paradise in the afterlife,
Right.
is in some ways really self-serving. And
Mhm.
one of the interesting things about like the thought experiment that this movie portrays, is Jesus is given the opportunity to have a life of peace. You know, like
Mhm.
he's given the choice between torture and death, or like a life that is like, you know, fulfilling and whatever. And he chooses the one that is not, like, you know, ultimately, like, his choice, like, he's tempted by um this, you know, normal life that would give him comfort, and instead chooses like torture. And I think a lot of Christians like fetishize martyrdom, and fetishize like being tortured and killed for their faith or whatever. But ultimately, like, their stance of, well, we're all just trying to get into heaven, means that they're not actually, you know, interested in true sacrificial living. What they're
Right.
interested in is, I want to pay right now so that I
Right.
can have comfort for eternity. And I think that this movie kind of portrays the opposite. Like, what
Right.
Jesus does in the movie is rejecting comfort in
Right.
order to live sacrificially, which
Yeah.
is interesting and powerful, I think.
And I think what's so interesting about Jesus as a figure is that not so much portrayed in this movie so much as in like the Gospels, but he gets really frustrated with people regularly, with how hung up they are on the Old Testament rules. Like, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that, you shouldn't be talking to her because she's like that. And he's just sort of like, you guys are missing the point. Like, none of that. These rules are not like the make it or break it. What's really the make it or break it is like what our hearts are doing to serve man and to serve God. And you're getting hung up on this is like just totally missing the whole point. And he gets so like angry about it. And we see that anger in this movie. But yeah, I still feel like that's where people are now still with Christianity, is they get so hung up on, are you doing it the right way? And you're not. So I'm going to give you a hard time about it. And that's going to save your soul somehow. Like, no. I don't.
There's the scene when he's going to the temple and he sees all the money changers or whatever, and they're saying like,
Mhm.
well, there's this like reason, there's this law, you know, the Old Testament law says we have to do it this way, so in order to do it this way, we got to be changing the money or
Right.
whatever. And then he's basically just like, screw your law, I'm gonna make a new law. Like, he just like is really flippant
I
about that.
am the new
And they're
law.
all just looking at him like, are you serious?
Yeah.
What do you mean you're gonna come in here and who are you, Wilbur?
Yeah, I like
are
that.
you?
That scene is great because yeah, they are just like, who are you? Like,
What the fuck are you?
what's going on right now? Like,
I mean,
Yeah, or
he
like
really
when
looks a little insane in this movie.
when
yeah,
he goes back to Nazareth and tries to talk to the people who knew him growing up, that's also a great scene,
yeah.
which is in the Bible, I think, where he like goes back and they're like, "Aren't you Mary's son?" And he's like, "Yeah." Like, "Oh, okay, go tell Mary that her son's here."
And then he's just super rude to Mary, and it's just kind of like, I am the son of God. And she's like, but you're my son. He's like, no, I'm the son of God. And he just like walks off, and she's just like, okay.
Since when is my son a little dick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I do think we have to bring up the score by Peter Gabriel, which is just
Good.
going 110% the entire time.
Is it Peter Gabriel? Andrew was saying it was Paul Simon.
No, it's
Andrew's
Peter Gabriel.
wrong.
I have
Andrew's
I have it
wrong.
on CD. It is Peter Gabriel. It is really going like hardcore. It does some of that thing that like I think has become like a cliche for like American movies depicting the Middle East, which is that you just have these like wailing and chants on the
Right.
score. And I don't know if that was as like played out and trite as it was like now, or in 1988 as it is now, but like there are times in which I'm like, it's it's maybe going a little too hard with the like, whatever, like, ooh, this is the Orient, but I think it's a really good score for the most part.
It just sets like such an interesting mood because it's so like celestial, like almost science fiction at times, which seems like that almost seems like diving into more blasphemy than what's actually on the screen because like it's almost like setting the scene that this is like almost like a fantasy sequence, more than like a person living in real life. Because just the way that Peter Gabriel, like, you just have those synths going. It just feels like you're in some fantasy world.
Yeah, and then like I do like the very end of the movie for a lot of reasons that I've already mentioned, but like the score at the end of the movie is really interesting too because like it like escalates to that moment when he gets back on the cross, and then it cuts to credits and it becomes like a Peter Gabriel pop song, like over the credits, and it's really fun and interesting to see that like emerge from like what otherwise has been a little bit atypical for Peter Gabriel.
Do you think that this is not about the music at all? Do you feel like if you didn't know that this was a Paul Schrader and Martin Scorsese movie, you would recognize that seeing it? Like if you went in blindly, would you see their voice in this movie?
I would recognize Paul Schrader. I don't know if I'd recognize Scorsese.
But we almost needed Jesus to have a scene where he's like doubting himself and writing in a journal. Then I would have known it was a Paul Schrader movie.
Yeah, I think it is interesting though because Paul Schrader is very Protestant, and Martin Scorsese is very Catholic, and I think that those are like interesting sensibilities to work through faith with. I do think that there is like a connection between like someone like Travis Bickle or the Toller in First Reformed or something like that. That kind of Paul Schrader character who like is more or less like a psychopath, like imbued with like this sense of divine import, and Jesus. Like there's definitely like Jesus in this movie feels of a piece with some of those characters. And the only difference is that we just have the meta cognitive like context of, oh, he's Jesus, so we can trust this guy. But there is like in a lot of Paul Schrader movies this idea of like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver is like walking around or driving around looking at like all the squalor of New York City and being like, God's gonna punish all these people and blah 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 blah. And like it's not too far to go from that to like Jesus looking around at like the money changers or whatever and being like, this isn't what God wants.
Or he's gonna burn in 3 days. Like,
yeah,
dude, are you making a bomb threat at us? Like, what is going on?
He does kind of come with a little incel energy in this one. I mean, he literally anytime he walks into a marketplace, he just knocks everything down.
But in this case, he's a voluntary celibate.
Yeah, he's just a cell.
Just a cell.
Yeah, that's true.
A bowl cell. I do think, though, it must be said, is this the hottest Jesus?
No.
Willem Dafoe is like got lots of sexual energy here, I think.
You know who has a hot Jesus is the remake of Ben-Hur. Super hot Jesus. Benedetta had a pretty hot Jesus too.
I think in the last episode we're gonna have to whoever, it's me and you, Zach. We're gonna have to figure out who the hottest portrayals.
It's not Graham Campbell. We'll just
I don't think it's Willem Dafoe.
Dang. I think Willem Dafoe is fairly attractive in this movie, but he's also like, I don't know. Willem Dafoe is like not in a lot of ways like not conventionally attractive, but he's just like got this energy, like just like this like incredible energy about him.
Getting a glimpse into your taste in men, Michael. That's very interesting. Willem Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe from like 30 years ago. But see, I think I would be afraid to be in his presence.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. He's frightening.
Willem Dafoe seems like a terrifying person.
Willem Dafoe cracked me up recently because he was in this interview for Spider-Man and they were like talking to him and he's like giving this like well thought out answer about why he wanted to come back to the world of Spider-Man and how it was about the character and how he just felt like the character progressed and all this stuff. And then they go to Alfred Molina and he's just like, yeah, they gave me a bunch of money. And then Willem Dafoe like gives him this look like we could have answered that way.
Wow.
Well, Last Temptation of Christ it's pretty rough. It's popped up on like Netflix and places and like Amazon Prime, so it wasn't there. I watched it on Tubi. But it's been on like Netflix and Amazon Prime. Yeah, this would be a good. I mean, you can watch it for Christmas. It's a good Easter movie as well. I feel like more of an Easter movie.
Yeah. In fact, we don't see his birth at all.
Yeah.
Not very Christmassy.
No.
But slaps. Good movie.
She's a baby.
It also has a really good Criterion release.
Oh, that's true.
It's like I think there's a Paul Schrader commentary track on it.
Yeah. Posey, it's Christmas. Posey also is confused on what season it is because Posey's wearing a pumpkin. So.
Yeah, Posey goes through pajamas really quickly, so we got to keep them all on hand.
Yeah. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where you can keep up with all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Thank you to our patrons, Cam, Chad Newsom, Corey Willingham, Harry Eskin, Candace Sisson, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Rio Ross. We really appreciate your patronage. Next week, we're going to be wrapping up our cinematic journey through the Bible with 1979's Life of Brian. So if you thought we were sacrilegious this week, we're going to get more sacrilegious.
I don't think that we were. I think we had a great discussion. I don't know how much we actually discussed the movie, but I think it was great.
Well, I find that in most biblical discussions, they never really talk about the Bible. They talk around the Bible. So I think we're in, the same realm.
Although I would say, I feel like it must be noted that this movie very loudly proclaims at the beginning that it is not based on the Bible.
Yeah.
It has like a big old disclaimer, like, don't worry, we're not actually being sacrilegious. This is just an adaptation of a novel. Which is funny to me, that even after, like, obviously, like, completely pandering to the Christian audience there, they still got, like, bombed and stuff.
Oh, can I also say that I really enjoyed the noted meme part when he like raises the glass and like smiles. I really enjoyed that part. I was like, hey, it's that part. All right, until next week. We'll see you then.
Okay.